wanna take your company value to 300 million, we gon' show you how to do it. Well, we got the roadmap, the aspirations. We'll give you a game plan and strategies. Seize control of your company's destiny today by tuning in to Private Capital Mastery. Yeah. Let's start the show.
Welcome back to another episode of the Private Capital Mastery Podcast. I'm Brian Franco, and today I am joined by Rob Crecak with Humans First. Rob owns a firm that is considered a multifaceted professional group known for their expertise in fractional CFO. With a background in finance and entrepreneurship, Rob possesses a unique blend of skills that enable him to identify and address pressing business challenges. Today, we delve into Rob's journey, his approach to problem solving, and the insights he offers to businesses seeking growth and success. And I think I could distill all of that down to, if you can't measure it, you cannot improve it. Wouldn't you agree, Rob?
Totally agree. I like the phrase, what gets measured gets managed. Same thing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. In our world of M&A advisory and investment banking, we say what gets measured gets multiplied.
Oh, I like that even better.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. You could borrow it anytime.
I love that. Yeah, I might steal that from you.
Give us a little bit of background on yourself. I know hopefully I didn't butcher your intro, but to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and love to go into some case studies of the work that you do and how that can be applied to companies that are being operated by founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me on the podcast, Brian, and Jacob as well. I really appreciate it, and certainly looking forward to the conversation today. My background is pretty unique in that I have 20 years of finance experience, but I'm also a 9-time entrepreneur. So usually if you think about the prototypical finance person, they love spreadsheets and they kind of sit in the corner and they, are not entrepreneurs. They're very risk averse, and entrepreneurs are like the ADHD, very outgoing, a million miles a minute, kind of like I'm speaking now type thing. And I'm sort of a rare combination of those two people in one person. I started my career as a sell-side equity analyst, and I'm a CFA charter holder. I analyzed medical device and pharmaceutical stocks for 5 years on Wall Street. And I also, like I said, I've had 9 businesses, which includes 3 health clubs, 4 cell phone repair stores, a technology startup, and I've sold all of those. And now I have my current consultancy, which is Humans First, offering fractional CFO services. So when I say that I help people with finance, yes, of course, I will help make a business more profitable. But with my entrepreneurship experience, I also help with a lot of other things like leadership, operations, HR, processes, all those things that make an entrepreneur successful that a finance-only person might not have or understand. I can put all those pieces together for somebody when I help them out with their business.
Yeah, hence the multifaceted approach that your group brings to a client. And it's crucial that you have a focus and emphasis on not only the financial aspect, but the operational aspect, the SOPs, could be HR. I'm sure you go deeper into some topics and subjects other than others, but all important. So glad to hear you've exited 9 companies and firsthand what it takes to bring a company to market, to negotiate that transaction, and then to consummate that transaction. And prior to closing, a buyer is going to conduct due diligence on your business, and you've been through this every time. And you think about, to frame this, you had to have a library of data and information accessible to the buyer, and if you didn't, those transactions, you would not be clicking the numbers that you did, right?
Right.
So, tell us, if you could give us some highlights of case, using a case study, were significant business challenges that you have encountered in your role as a fractional CEO and or advisor. What were those specific hurdles faced by the client, and how did you come in with your unique combination of financial acumen and entrepreneurship and insight to overcome these challenges and drive them to success?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you an example of a client of mine who owned a physical therapy clinic, and his therapy clinic was doing really well, and he's actually a very numbers oriented person, and he's very analytical and logical, which is great. I always like working with those people because they already kind of get it. I don't have to explain it to them. And so, I was looking at his P&L, and I, didn't really expect to see anything too crazy because, again, he's very numbers oriented and he's all about productivity, and he does a very good job running a tight ship. But I, started seeing some trends in the numbers, and we were looking at the revenue numbers from one of his therapists, and we started comparing amongst the therapists, we were looking at his top performer. But to me, there's actually some other data that showed that she probably could have been billing even more. So what I uncovered after about 2 hours of analysis with this person is that top therapist was not billing enough units, or not as many units as she could have. And so that effectively was costing him $35,000 annually just from that one particular billing error. And so then you multiply that over, how many years she's worked with him, and, that becomes many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then if that same thing is happening with other therapists at the clinic or any future people that you would hire, you could quickly see how this becomes a multi-$100,000 error that I essentially uncovered after 2 hours of analysis. But you really needed to dig into the details and really understand what was happening on a very minute level in order to truly understand why that was happening. And I think part of the approach that I have fine-tuned since my equity research days is I really like to ask a lot of very detailed questions, and a lot of questions that people might not even think to ask are something that I would ask in order to uncover those types of errors or information from a business owner, for instance.
Yeah, I love those thought-provoking questions. And it sounds like they were excited and happy to hear that you found through your analysis that they could and should be charging more in certain segments of their business. But I imagine that was pretty painful at the same time, knowing that they went all this time, not correctly billing, it sounds like. And I say correctly because I assume that your analysis was done on perhaps a peer-to-peer basis and or based on reimbursements allowable in their particular space.
Right, exactly. And you could look at, what their other therapists were reimbursing per hour or per session, or however you want to look at it. And you could see that she was clearly not as high as some of the other people.
Mm-hmm. And was not, I'm trying not to go into the details, but it's important to know, and the listeners to know, was this a private pay practice, or was it insurance, or a combination thereof?
His mix has changed over time, but I think at the time he was roughly half and half, like half insurance and half private pay.
Yeah, and from my work that I've done in healthcare, when you are charging too little, right, there are some payers that they'll pay you as much as the lowest price point that you pay or charge. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And so this certainly magnifies the top line revenue of the company. But I can see the pain, and I can see the pleasure in this work that you did. So very, very exciting for them, and I'm sure they're happy with knowing what you taught them.
Yeah, absolutely. He was thrilled, and it was kind of one of those blissfully painful moments where he was like, man, I wish I had seen this a lot sooner, or wish you had taken a look at this sooner. But he was still grateful that there was a good outcome for him.
Great. Do you find this is a common theme in terms of a pain point for your clients? And if so, what are those? How do you overcome those challenges? And you as a fractional CFO and advisor, how do you alleviate these pains, through your strategic guidance?
Yeah, I mean, what I was, the more that I do this, the more that I'm surprised that I think in humanity in general, right? When something is uncomfortable, right? Whether it's thinking about finances or having this tough conversation with your spouse or doing some difficult task at your job, right? Whenever we encounter some difficult thought, we have to either decide, am I going to deal with this? Am I going to take the time and energy and emotional strength to go through this and process it? Or am I just going to ignore it? And what I didn't realize happens a lot more than I now realize is that a lot of people, when they think about their business finances, it becomes overwhelming and daunting. And I understand why. But then instead of going forward and trying to understand and master their finances, they just completely ignore them and pretend they don't exist. And that to me is literally the worst idea you could ever, or the worst path that you could ever have. Because if you don't pay attention to your business finances, that's like a pilot flying a plane blindfolded for like an hour. And you might be okay for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but if you fly long enough with your eyes closed, eventually you're going to hit something. And that's exactly what happens to business owners. When they ignore their finances for so long, you might be able to withstand that for a short amount of time, or maybe even a decent amount of time, depending on how good your business is run. But eventually, there's still going to be some huge problem that is now exponentially more difficult to solve because you have not addressed it sooner.
That's right. Typically, as the organization grows, those what were small problems are magnified. And,
Totally.
And that's never good. So this is a common theme that you see and you address as you advise clients. And I loved how you used the illustration of an airplane pilot, and specifically, there's a picture that we use in our presentation when we're sitting with a client and we're talking about how to navigate the marketplace when they're taking their company to market for purposes of raising capital or liquidity or an exit, partial liquidity or like an exit. But in that picture, we illustrate, all the dials and everything on a pilot's dashboard. And to your point, if you have any experience with airplane pilots, an airplane pilot could fly a plane blindfolded if they looked at their instrumentation, right?
Sure.
But it kind of goes to the same with the entrepreneur. It's not the other way. You can't fly a plane without the instruments.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so,
Well, and to me, the financial instruments are the P&L, right, and the balance sheet. And what just blows me away is how long people will operate a business doing millions in revenue, and their accounting they don't even have accounting really. That to me is just totally mind blowing. And so you're asking kind of what's the solution? Just to be clear, I'm not an accountant. I don't do the accounting, but I would work with my client to onboard an accountant who does the accounting and make sure that all the financial statements are properly prepared and accurate. And, that's one of the common things that I do for clients because they don't have the understanding or the knowledge of, how to hire an accountant or what's involved in that or what data is needed or what systems to use. And I can kind of be the liaison between the accounting firm and my client in order to ensure that the books are done correctly.
mm-hmm. We typically see accountants or CPAs are very good at telling you what had happened, but the work that you're doing is giving them that play-by-play coaching approach. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that because when I was a sell-side equity analyst, I made financial models for a living, really. And, these models will be published to the street, and buy-side clients would ask me about them and call me up. And so, I think about the financial model, and to me, that's just what I do, that's just part of how I analyze a company. But all my clients have never really had a financial model, or if they have had one, not a good one. And so when you really understand the business well, and then you build an amazing financial model for them, a couple key things really happen that get me very excited. The first thing is that business owner has a lot more financial clarity. They now have a financial vision for where the company is going, and not just, in the next 12 months, but maybe 3 or 5 years out. And that to me gets very exciting because they can see, hey, like if I continue to do this in the business and continue to grow like this, here's how much money I make. And then here's eventually how much I could sell that business for. That to me is an awesome conversation that I love having. The other thing that the financial model does, which I don't think a lot of business owners would truly appreciate, but I really think it gives a lot of owners confidence and belief in themselves that, hey, if I continue to do these things, here's what is going to happen. Like, here's the outcome. And then they get more motivated to continue to execute well, which again is obviously a huge positive for them. And, I like seeing the clients be successful, and that's a positive for me too.
Yeah. Yeah. We love bringing that to attention that, yes, we need to focus on the income, but you have to be mindful of the outcome. Work that you're doing is really helping them see that and giving them the lenses that they need to measure that, right? And the possibilities of the work that you do, and given your background, not only in finance, but as an entrepreneur, be curious, when should a client reach out to you? When they do, what's the approach? What's the timeline? Is there maintenance to this? What does that look like?
Yeah, great question. So there's a general, revenue range that a fractional CFO is appropriate for, but and that's generally a business doing 2 million to 20 million in revenue. Now, I've definitely worked with clients well below 2 million, and I've also worked with clients above 20 million. So I'm not saying that I would, that's a very hard and fast range. But generally, clients between 2 and 20 million have the ability to pay for my services, and they get a good enough ROI, but they're not, they probably have not likely hired a full-time CFO on staff. So that's why the fractional, me as a fractional executive coming in is appropriate for those revenue ranges. Generally, what I like to do with my engagements is I will start by having a client do a very detailed survey, and it's a custom survey that I came up with myself. It's a combination of a lot of financial questions, but it's also psychology and some questions about the owner themselves. My approach is to only take on a very limited number of clients at one time. I only take on 4 in my highest capacity. The reason for that is I want to truly understand and get to know the business and the owner extremely well. I can only do that if I take a lot of time. And so that's why I only work with 4 clients at once. So during this process, the client fills out this survey. It takes them about an hour or so, depending on how detailed it is. And then to begin our engagement, I'll generally meet with them in person, even if they're, remote, like far away. I like to fly and meet them because the name of my company is Humans First. I like being with and connecting with people in person. And I will spend basically an entire day going through that survey and talking to them in detail about everything, talking about their business, what their goals are, how, about them personally, getting to know them. And by the end of that day, let's say there's 20 different things that I could help a business with in general, right? By the end of that first day, when I've talked to them for about 8 hours, I will have a list of the 3 things that I think are probably a top priority. And so I'll ask them which of the 3, they want to start with first, and then we'll get going on working on that in the weeks that come.
Yeah, I love those discovery days because you unpack a lot of the information, not only about the business, but the culture of the company. And you can't really see that over a video. You have to be there in person. Right. You have to have that human connection. Yeah. And then further, you have to see how you're going to drive the process so that it is received well by the human, specifically here, the owner, the entrepreneur, because they're going to prioritize your advice differently on their own than they would without your input, right? But with your input, you could give them a step-by-step roadmap to going from where they are to where they need to be. That's powerful because there are a lot of tools out there, even software, that can help us analyze a company, from revenues to COGS to middle of the P&L expenses. But you and I both know P&L and balance sheets, although they tell us a lot about a company's financial health, they don't tell us everything about the company.
Right.
I love that your approach incorporates, let's call these dimensions of the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, well, Rob, yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I just wanted to expand on that a little bit because it's interesting. And I say this, because I've also learned a lot of things about myself as an entrepreneur in this journey with me helping other entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I think really holds a lot of entrepreneurs back is that they have limiting beliefs about what they can accomplish, or what their business should be worth, or what they are worth as people. And again, I had some of that in my past as well. And, it's taken me a lot of work on myself to, not only, first of all, become aware of those thoughts, but also to, kind of break through those limiting beliefs. And I do find a lot of the time that entrepreneurs aren't successful because they're self-sabotaging, or they're holding themselves back, but they don't even realize that they're doing it. And so I could be the best financial analyst on the planet and give you the most amazing financial plan, but that person is never going to be successful because they still have these limiting beliefs. And so part of what I do is to help the person, confront those and break through those, and really help themselves believe in themselves in a different level. And I really see the most successful entrepreneurs are able to do everything that I just said in terms of changing their belief systems about themselves. And I think that this is a very underappreciated part, and virtually no finance person is going to tell you what I just said, because we're not talking about finance here. We're talking about psychology and human emotion, right? And that's not what finance people look at necessarily. But I do think that's a big differentiator for my approach. And I really think it makes all the difference, because I've seen it for myself.
In the name of your firm says it all, humans first. And in that statement, in that description that you just provided speaks to that. And I could see how you came up with that name.
Cool. Well, I'm glad that I'm consistent with the brand. That's good.
It certainly resonates with me. But Rob, as we wrap up here, is there any key advice or takeaways that you would provide business operators seeking to overcome challenges in their company? And when you think of whichever industry they're in, every industry has a competitive landscape, right? But any key takeaways, any key advice that you could leave everyone with here? And certainly we're going to provide your contact information in the description below the show, so that folks could reach out to you and be one of those four that you work with and advise with. But any key nuggets of information?
Yeah, well, one thing that I wish I had realized as a finance professional a long time ago is that the key to scaling any business is a simple equation. It's just customer acquisition cost as a ratio compared to lifetime value. And depending on what your margins are, you want lifetime value to be at least 3-to-1. But 3-to-1 is good, 4-to-1 is great, and 5-to-1 is amazing. And so if you have a decent margin business and you have a good ratio of customer acquisition cost to lifetime value, as long as you can continue to exploit that marketing channel and continue to acquire customers at that cost, and of course, fulfill the work or do the operations, there's no reason why your company can't be $100 million or $1 billion. So, that it's just a very simple equation. And I wish that I had honestly known about that when I was a business owner, because I didn't realize that, for instance, when I owned the gyms, or not as well as I should have. And so that to me was like a total game changer, especially when you think about SaaS businesses, of course. That's like a key part of the financial model, essentially. One other thing, Brian, that I just wanted to offer anyone listening to the podcast here is a complimentary 45-minute consultation with me. All you need to do to redeem that is just email me. My email address is Rob, R-O-B, @humansfirst.us. Just mention this podcast, and I'll be happy to set up a complimentary 45-minute call with you so that I can talk about your particular financial concerns and help you get some financial clarity.
We appreciate that, because part of the Private Capital Mastery podcast is here to primarily collapse time for entrepreneurs and to bring these sources and these tools, if you would, to entrepreneurs so that they can accelerate the growth of their business, accelerate the enterprise value of the business, but all in a compressed, collapsed time frame, which otherwise, if they're doing on their own, would and could take them decades.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I mean, any entrepreneur would want to, be more profitable faster and have a bigger exit. So I feel like that really resonates with a lot of people, and I really appreciate what you're doing for the entrepreneurial community. We need more people doing stuff like this that you're doing.
I agree, Rob, and I would be happy to have you back on the show again to talk about other subjects and just give folks the ability to think about, how they could equip themselves and their companies to perform better. So, Rob, thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, likewise. And we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Capital Mastery Podcast. And I think the key phrase out of this episode was what gets measured gets multiplied. And if you're not making the appropriate measurements inside your business, this is the time to take a serious look at that and take action. I'm your host, Brian Franco. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you on next week's episode.